What is this place? I've never seen this much overgrowth before. It's beautiful. Is this what it used to look like? The world?
Hello, I'm LegenTerry and this is Viewfinder, a mind-bending puzzle game developed by Sad Studios and published by Thunderful Games. Viewfinder is a game that's all about perspective. When you look at a picture, what do you see? Is it just a flat image on a layer of film? Or is it an entire world you could step into and lose yourself in? Viewfinder is the literal interpretation of that line of thinking. It's a puzzle game with a hint of light platforming where photographs become portals that let you bend and break reality. There is a story included in this game, but it's pretty slim and mostly told through audio logs and post-it notes that you can read. The game practically shows you the trajectory for the whole plot within about an hour, and there aren't many surprising revelations or detours to follow. It's pretty much just set dressing for the game to nudge you forwards as you solve its puzzles. As your character wanders through the beautiful and long deserted virtual world, you come across Polaroid-style photographs that were left behind by its creators. When you hold one up in front of you, the image becomes a real space and anchors itself within the world based on your perspective. If there was anything behind the picture, it becomes clipped out of reality, as if someone punched a square-shaped hole through the environment and replaced it with what you saw in the photograph. Explaining how you can toy with hyperbolic space in this way sounds like the ravings of a madman, but seeing is believing. Early in your adventure, you stumble upon the camera that made this magic possible and can begin using it yourself. I can't help but be reminded of the first time picking up the titularly named portal gun from the game Portal. Both objects become tools that are a menace in the face of physics, and both present neat ways to overcome their respective obstacles. You'll find that this game is heavily inspired by titles like the aforementioned Portal, Superliminal, and Antichamber. If you've ever found yourself enjoying a good head-scratcher like these, then Viewfinder is absolutely up your alley. The photography mechanic is a really cool foundation to build a game around. It forces you to use your brain in ways that are completely unconventional. There's a creative expressiveness in using the photos that makes you feel like you have control over the world itself. It feels like you're doing something impossible, like you're breaking some kind of rule of nature, but you're also limited by what you can see and how imaginative the world that's already present lets you become. The puzzles are completed by finding your way to the teleporter station at the end of each level. Sometimes you'll have to fetch batteries to power the teleporter, and sometimes you'll have to find a way to reach a teleporter in an unusual location. Each puzzle requires that you use the photograph mechanic, but sometimes the method the developers intend you to solve the puzzle with might not be the only way forward. There were definitely a few times where it felt like I brute forced the solution. Not that I really needed to, it was just cool to try out. Viewfinder is far from the most difficult puzzle game out there, and I only found myself stumbling on a couple of the later levels. It might look confusing, but honestly, it's one of the most relaxing games I've played in years. The visual aesthetic of the world is simplistic but colorful, and it has this kind of postmodern organic vibe. The soundtrack is full of soft jazz and rhythmically charged synth that could chill out the most fiery of moods. It's warm and inviting, and there's no real rush to get to the end. And there's a cat you can pet. But if you do find yourself getting stuck without a clear way to progress, it isn't a big deal. The game will offer to give you a hint after a couple of minutes have passed. You don't have to use them, but they're there if you want them. And if you make a mistake, you can always rewind the world to a previous state. This makes experimentation a fun part of the process that the game won't punish you for. Being allowed to play at your own pace is a big plus in my book. One thing that I didn't enjoy was having another character narrating and acting as your guy in the chair for a large portion of the game. I could see ways that this could have been done well, but the overly bubbly tone of your sidekick just doesn't make for a great fit. It feels like this person is talking at you rather than with you, almost like one of the radio hosts from the Forza Horizon series. That might sound like an odd comparison, but that's kind of the whole point. They feel like they came from a completely different video game. I don't need somebody else shouting about how much fun I'm supposed to be having, just let me have the fun myself. And that's not just talk, because Viewfinder is a very fun game. Though the leading mechanic in Viewfinder doesn't really evolve beyond the initial eureka moment, in my opinion. It's a party trick, and although it is a fantastic party trick, you can only see it performed so many dozens of times before it starts to lose the magic. However, the game does give you some other ideas to play with, and has some very clever elements that change the way you interact with the world. There's a point fairly early in the game where you pick up pictures that were drawn or painted rather than photographed. And when you use these, the game lets you step through a handful of environments, each with impressively unique visual identities and sound design to match. It made a really strong impression, and gave me a real appreciation for the artists and programmers that made this work. Viewfinder is pretty short, clocking in at about 4 to 6 hours depending on how long you spend doing optional puzzles. Those are a fair bit tougher than the required ones. But that brevity doesn't feel like a shortcoming of the game. It gives you enough time to enjoy yourself and leave before it begins wearing out its welcome. And even though the story isn't the main draw, it manages to wrap up the narrative in a fairly satisfying way. It doesn't end in a cliffhanger exactly, but there were still a couple of loose threads to tug on, and I imagine there may be a secret ending for 100% completion. Or maybe they're just leaving space for a sequel, but that's a question for another day. Viewfinder is a brilliant game that at times will make you feel like the smartest person in the room. Its distinctive vision feels like another step forwards for a genre that celebrates boundless imagination. If you find yourself interested in games with innovative and thought-provoking puzzles that warp the senses, you'll probably love exploring its picturesque world and strolling across the wondrous pathways you can conjure. Viewfinder receives a 9 out of 10.